Well, if there's one thing we know, the influence of a mentoring group can change a career. It has the ability to nurture a younger, inexperienced player, integrate them into the first team squad, and strengthen their personality too. In many ways, it's a feature that's simply too important to ignore in Football Manager. Today, I'm going to provide a step by step guide to mentoring in FM26, which can help you maximize youth development, improve your club dynamics, and help you achieve success in your career. We'll also take a look through some of the big changes to the technical side, plus demonstrate how to access and utilize the new layout of mentoring functions in this year's game. If you like the sound of that, then please do add a thumbs up to the video and check out the full FM26 tutorials playlist up in the eye above. For now though, before we go into FM26 and tackle how to arrange mentoring groups, let's first answer the important questions. What is mentoring? How can we find it? What's changed in this game? And why should we use it? Now you'll have to bear with me because I've written my notes and I will be referring to them to make sure I don't miss anything. But in simple terms, mentoring, which was previously called tutoring for those of you that have played Football Manager for donkey's years like me, it works in the same way as it does in the real footballing world or pretty much in any other walk of life. In FM26, mentoring allows young players to work with more experienced professionals and more positive role models to learn and develop in many technical and mental aspects of the game. From seeing the character and personality that's required to succeed at a club or the top level, as well as integrating with core social groups and learning helpful traits, mentoring provides an opportunity to support your management of young players, new signings, and even your tactical setups. Although it can be useful for new additions to your squad and players in similar positions to your leaders, mentoring is most commonly associated with youth development, and that's because it can play a key role in the progression of talented young players. We mentioned this in our youth development guide yesterday for that very reason, but there are so many benefits to this training area. Let's go over to Football Manager and have a little look at some of them. Right then, here we are in Football Manager. We've just started a Newcastle save in FM26, just so we can give a few demonstrations and examples throughout this guide, but I will talk about how it relates to the lower levels of the pyramid too, which of course I'm managing at in both of my long-term saves here and over on Twitch. So firstly, before we go and get into any of the groups and the details and what we want to do, we're just going to talk about how to find it in the new user interface. So we're going to go to our squad section and to training, and from here we're going to click the mentoring tile right at the bottom of this pop-up here. Once we get to that, we have the option to set up our mentoring groups. We can assign it to the assistant, which you can do, but I wouldn't recommend. But as you can see at the moment, we're fresh at the start of a save. There are no mentoring groups, so we can work from scratch. Now from here, we're going to talk about some of the changes in FM26 because when we click to create a new mentoring group in this tile, we're presented with our option of which players we'd like to add. Now, as you've seen in previous editions of the game, you could have smaller or bigger groups, and actually, the main question from my previous FM24 guide to mentoring was, well, what size group is perfect? Well, I think FM are sort of giving you the answer here because now we're only allowed to have 3-player groups. But you can see there are a number of differences about the way it's set up here, not just the fact that you can only have a set number of players in a group, but also in terms of the way the information is laid out, and once we've set up our group, you'll be able to see the influences of the players between each other a lot more clearly. Now, for all of the criticism of the FM26 user interface, generally speaking, bar one omission we'll talk about later, I actually think this is laid out far more efficiently and clearly than in previous games, with handy arrows and colour coding as we go along to help us out. We'll have a little look at that in a bit more detail later on though, when we're setting up and reviewing our groups. So now we know what mentoring is, how to access it, how it looks in FM, and why it's important. So let's go and talk about the 3 main ways we can use these groups to benefit us during our career. Now, the first of these main benefits is probably the most commonly used and acknowledged one, which is to improve personalities, generally for younger and developing players in these instances. Now, we've all been there before, haven't we? A wonderful talent arrives in our youth intake, the potential to be the next big thing for our club, outstanding attributes in all the key areas you need. Then your eyes glance and peer to the right, and we're met with one of those undesirable personality descriptions. While not ideal, it doesn't have to be the end of the road now, thanks to mentoring. Generally, the rule is pretty simple both in real life and in Football Manager, which is the stronger the personality, the more someone will learn. So, with that in mind, if we can help a player become more professional, determined, or in an ideal world, both, it's a huge benefit to both them and to the football club moving forward. Therefore, if any of your team leaders or influential players with preferred personalities, we all know the glorious ones such as model citizen, model professional, even professional, resolute, determined, etc., can have a positive influence on some of these younger players, it's great to arrange for them to work together and aid development. Let's head to FM and see how we do this when creating a mentoring group. So to do this, we'll go to exactly the same step as we showed in our introduction to mentoring, which is the create new mentoring group. We get to it exactly the same way as we did before. And once here, we're back to where we started. The 3 optional players we can add into this group. Now, there is no debate about size of a mentoring group. It is just 3 players and we have got to get this right. But generally, you've got 2 choices at this point, and that will largely depend on the level you're operating at, the level of your club, and the number of good and bad characters you've got in your squad. At this point, we'll also want to consider the average age profile too, as this could be important when deciding when to delegate and how many groups to set up. Essentially, every mentoring group, you know 2 of the 3 roles. One person is going to have to be a group leader with a strong personality, and one person is that periphery figure or that younger player that you're including to learn from them. However, what you do with the 3rd member is up to you or up to the squad you've inherited. If you have several brilliant characters, for example, and an experienced squad and want to help a single brilliant talented youngster as much as possible, you could add a second leader or influential player to the group. This is more likely at the top level where, for example, here at Newcastle, we've got an experienced squad, lots of brilliant professionals, and just 2 or 3 fantastic youngsters that we're going to try and help. Alternatively though, where I normally operate at the lower levels where influential leaders and long-term players at the club with even half-decent personalities are incredibly tough to come by, you'll perhaps want to try and help 2 younger players with just 1 senior professional to get as much as possible out of the 2 or 3 good pros you've got at the club. Let's show an example of the group here and how it might differ if we were working at the lower level. So for example, here you can see we've got an interesting mix. Loads of brilliant experienced players, and I've set them by age order. You can do it by filtering any of them here. So if we go and look at our older players in the squad, you can see from the hierarchy screen that most of them are influential players or team leaders. A lot of them, not all, but most, have very good personalities. We're looking at fairly professional. We're looking at fairly determined. We're looking at resolute. We're looking at a model citizen, the perfect one in the case of John Ruddy. We've also got a lot of players that are at a very good age and can help out some of the younger players. Now, at the top level, you've generally not got as many brilliant young players in your first team squad. A lot of them will be out on loan. A lot of them will still be in your under 21 side. Though remember, you can promote them via training units to make them eligible for mentoring here. We discussed that in the youth development guide yesterday. But here we're looking at helping one young player in particular, which is Lewis Miley. He's a 19-year-old. He's a brilliant young player. He's got the potential to be an outstanding Premier League midfielder, but he's still got a balanced personality and we need to take him to the next level. So we've got an option here when we're looking at just improving the personality, and it will differ to when we're looking at something else a bit later on. But we might want to link this player, ideally with people in similar positions, but most ultimately with top level professionals. So if we go and look at our club and outfield players at the moment, you're looking at someone like, for example, Kieran Trippier, who has a resolute personality, has good determination, which is slightly better, but also is a very highly influential player in the squad. He's a team leader, in fact. And the same could be said for someone like Dan Burn, who is a team leader, is an exceptional personality, very professional, very determined, and may be able to help on the character front for Lewis Miley. So with that consideration in mind, we're going to add Dan Burn and we're going to add Kieran Trippier alongside Lewis Miley, our young talent. Now, if you are working at most squads at the lower level of the game, you'll generally have a lot more younger players, either on loan or free agents released from clubs at a bigger level that haven't quite made it. And you'll probably only have 1 or 2 experienced pros. You're also less likely to have people further up the squad hierarchy because, unlike at the top levels of the game, you don't normally have a lot of squad continuity. You don't often have players that have been at the club 5, 10, 15 years. And you don't have players that have played at the top level of football a lot. So it might be that you've only got 1 fairly professional or 1 fairly determined player in the squad and loads of youngsters with balanced or poorer personalities, in which case you have to make difficult decisions. And certainly you'll want to have 2 youth players and 1 senior pro. For an example, if you were working at the lower level of the game, you're probably only likely to have one fairly professional player. Let's say Fabian Schär as an example. They're a highly influential player, not a team leader. And in this case, you might want to set them to work with both Lewis Miley and William Asula, because they're two young players that can benefit, and you're getting as much as possible out of your senior professional. But let's just show the example here at Newcastle. We're going to set up the group with Dan Burn, with Kieran Trippier and Lewis Miley. Now let's have a look at what that looks like once we've set up the group. Because this, for me, is probably the best change to graphics in FM26 from one of the tiled screens. It used to be all in written form in FM24, and it was never really that clear. You just got a little note to say, this person's having an average influence, this one's having no influence, but you didn't see the direct influence of every single player on the other. Whereas in this screen, you've got what is now going to be the golden triangle for youth development and mentoring. Because you can see very clearly here by color-coded arrows who is influencing who and how much they're influencing them. So Kieran Trippier and Dan Burn are having no influence on each other. They're both team leaders. They're both great professionals. They don't need to learn anything more. Lewis Miley, as you'd probably predict, is having no influence on the two senior professionals at the club. However, the two senior pros, Dan Burn and Kieran Trippier, have green arrows pointing towards Lewis Miley, and that indicates that they're both having a significant influence on his personality. And it also shows you at the top the group efficiency and the players' effects and influence on one another. So it's telling you that these two are going to make one hell of an impact on Miley, as long as he's willing to listen. Now, I know I keep talking about yesterday's guide, but they do sort of go hand in hand. Youth development at this stage and mentoring as an overall subject. Now, we've seen the difference in the look in FM26 and how we set the groups up, but what happens in the background doesn't really change. It's paramount to the development of young players that they have a better personality. If they have one of the better or stronger personalities, more desirable ones in a game, if they're more professional, more determined, they're likely to naturally develop more rapidly over time and with a better likelihood of reaching their overall full potential. If you can address and strengthen a player's characters at a young age, like Lewis Miley here, who's still a teenager, it could have a profound benefit on their future career. And what's more, if you're planning to be at a club for the long term, so say we're going to do 20 years at Newcastle, we might by coincidence create the next mentoring group lead for the next generation, because in 10 years, Lewis Miley might become professional or resolute, and he'll be teaching the next 17-year-olds, the next 18-year-olds, how to become good professionals. So this should, if you're in a one-club story, end up almost becoming a constant cycle throughout your career in charge. Now, before we move on to the next step, I do need to give a quick warning, and I very briefly mentioned it a moment ago. It's only going to work if the player is listening. Now, just as in real life, no matter what you try to do, some players will never listen, won't mature, won't take your advice, won't take senior professionals' advice. We've seen so many examples of it in the real world. So please bear in mind that you will never achieve 100% success, as that just wouldn't be realistic. But with the main reason for mentoring now covered, let's talk about a couple of the other less used outcomes that it can help produce too, which you may find useful. Now, the second potential use of mentoring is to pass on player traits. This is, quite frankly, nowhere near as important as it used to be in the old tutoring system many years ago, but it can still be very useful for players in similar positions or players who you're trying to mould to be the replacement for one of your senior pros in the future. It does often require more specific player matches to gain any intended benefit, and maybe unlike the main use we looked at a moment ago, where we're trying to do that as early as possible in development, this one's perhaps more ideal for either a new signing who you're looking to mould into the squad, or in the middle or later stages of a player's development. So this is sort of ideal for players you need to train to take over a position in the future. For this to work though, you do need the senior player to have desirable player traits for the intended position. So examples of this may include a striker that places shots, or an inverted winger that likes to cut inside with the ball, or even run at the fullback. While the benefits of passing on these traits to developing players are pretty obvious, there are potential flaws too. You still need to consider the personality that we discussed in the first use of mentoring to avoid any unintended regressions to a player's personality while you're teaching them new traits. You'll also need to make a judgment call if a senior player has a trait that you really want to pass on, but then also has a more negative one too. So for example, you may have a player up front who places shots, but they also like to argue with the assistant referee, which wouldn't be particularly ideal. may mean a few more yellow cards, but is it worth it for the number of extra goals it may pass on to your team? In essence, for this to work properly, you need a perfect mix of positions, traits, and personalities to align in your squad, which doesn't happen very often if we're being brutally honest. Again, more common at the top level of the game. When it does work, you can strike gold with mentoring here. So let's go back to Newcastle and Lewis Miley and take a look at an alternative mentoring route. Now we've come back to our mentoring screen in Football Manager here, and we're going to set up another mentoring group from scratch. We're still going to focus on Lewis Miley, but we're going to talk about the differences we could apply here to focus on player traits as well as personality, or instead of, depending on the situation. So let's go to create a group again, and it's come up, as you can see, with the original one we've set up. But we don't want that now. We're going to consider player traits, and positions is going to be crucial for doing that, because Lewis Miley is a young centre midfielder who I'm trying to retrain to become my holding midfielder and deep line playmaker of the future, to take over from more senior players such as Sandro Tonali and Bruno Guimaraes, maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the line. So with that in mind, we probably want to see if they've got any traits that could be helpful to pass on. It is also important that we consider the personality and hierarchy still, and you can see while Tonali is not as perfect as a team leader, he's only got a highly influential hierarchy role, and he's also not got the best personality in the world, but is still an improvement and a step up from Lewis Miley's one. He's fairly determined rather than balanced. But if we go and have a look at Sandro Tonali, we can see that he's got 2 player traits. Unfortunately, Lewis Miley has none, and even more unfortunately, you can no longer see them from this screen, so you will have to click into the player. However, once you do that, we can see that our current starting holding midfielder, Sandro Tonali, likes to dictate the tempo and try long-range passes. Now, this is perfect. This is exactly the sort of thing we'd like to pass on to Lewis Miley. So the question then becomes, are we willing to sacrifice a little bit of the personality development to get a mixture of personality improvement from one of the senior pros and player trait pickups from someone like Tonali? Now, you may decide you want to go all out on the player traits if you've got a new signing with a slightly better personality, or you've got someone who's already a little bit more experienced, has just joined the club perhaps as a new signing, and is going to be your long-term replacement, but isn't yet as influential, so could still pick them up from more senior pros. In this instance, you may want to look at both of your other senior players, being ones that can pass on traits. So if we look at our other midfielders, such as Bruno Guimaraes, who's a team leader, only has a balanced personality, his determination is still the same level as Lewis Miley, so he shouldn't regress him on that front. But he's got the same 2 traits, and he's got the tries killer balls often. So you might think, that's perfect, I'm going to pass both of those on to Miley or to my new signing. Now in this instance, because I think it's so important that Miley develops his personality, I'm still going to go a little bit cautious and keep one of those senior pros in the squad. So we might pick Dan Burn as the professional, we may pick Trippier as the resolute personality, and these guys have both got traits as well, so you may want to consider that. Kieran Trippier gets forward whenever possible. Are we going to want that in a holding midfielder? Maybe not so much. So as a result, we're going to take Trippier out. We'll keep Dan Burn in. He is there as our personality developer. But we're also now going to have a player trait and role developer. And that man is going to be Sandro Tonali. Now you could add Tonali and Guimaraes instead of Burn if you just want to develop the traits. But we're going to go cautious and go in the middle here. So Sandro Tonali will now join the mentoring group instead. And we'll confirm that to change to this new group. Now, as you can see, it's made a slight change to our golden triangle. It's no longer the perfect 2 greens on a youth player. It's now a green and a yellow. Now, as you can see from the graphic, that indicates an average influence from Tonali on Miley, which is still good, but not quite as strong as what Trippier had and what Burn still has. So it means they're slightly less likely to pick up the personality influences and the player traits as they would be from someone with a significant influence. Now, this isn't going to be a huge problem for us. We're still going to give it a go, but it goes back to what I mentioned a moment ago. That 100% success rate is just going to slightly drop now. What we hope is that Burn has his significant influence quickly, Miley maybe becomes fairly professional, and then Tonali can start to influence with his player traits. Not always going to work out, but it's certainly worth a go for us. Let's move on now to the final use of mentoring, which sadly has become somewhat reduced in importance and impact in FM26, and that is to integrate social groups. This was always the most underused, well-hidden element, and is probably the only negative of the new mentoring layout in this year's game. Previously, you could use mentoring in conjunction with social groups to help integrate new signings or promoted players into your desired social group. This was done by pairing influential players in your club hierarchy that were also in your core social group with players on the periphery on both fronts. This was a great way to both integrate new signings and improve multiple areas of your club dynamics, which we'll discuss in a future guide, with all the information you needed to arrange it on one screen. Now, while I've tested it in multiple instances in FM26, and it does still work a lot of the time as a process, unfortunately, setting it up itself is significantly more fiddly in this year's game. Let's go over to FM and see what I mean. Now, we're back on our mentoring group page here, and you can actually see that the social groups is still an important element of this because it's still included in the tile overall, and you can click on it here to see from one screen away. But unfortunately, when we now go to set up a mentoring group, or we'll just try and edit this one, we can no longer see it as we're setting up the group for each player. Just one extra line and a slightly bigger tile here could solve the problem, and we could then see the social group at the same time. So as a result, before we do this, our only option really is to click on the club's social groups and to then go and take a note of these players, which ones are in the core social group and which ones are in the periphery. So for example here, we've got quite a well tight-knit squad that's been together a long time at Newcastle. Most of them all in that group, but there's a few in a secondary social group, and you may wish to consider this with some of the earlier groups as well. You can see a young fullback, in fact, a couple of young fullbacks that are in the secondary group here as well. There is one other way to find this information while you're setting up the group itself, and that is by clicking into the player's profile, and in their personal section, you can see which social group they're in here too. And you may find that a more useful way, but for now, it's just whichever works best for you of the two. So I'm just going to show you for the sake of it, a quick group that you could set up with this example in mind. So let's say Harrison Ashby, we decided was going to be our backup right back this year. He's not, but I'm just showing you as an example. We know that he is in a secondary social group. He is not integrated with the core one. And this would probably be the case if we brought in a replacement backup right back as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to add him to our new mentoring group. And as luck would have it, from the first two we've just set up, we freed up Kieran Trippier, who is a team leader in the core social group with an excellent personality and in the same position. I mean, we couldn't have asked for any more, could we? So we're going to add Kieran Trippier into this group as well. And we also saw that while he's a little bit more influential, Tino Livramento was in that secondary group as well. So we're going to add him to this group and we're going to press confirm to see what the influence is. Now you can see from our second group here that Kieran Trippier is having a significant influence on Tino Livramento, and he's also having an average influence on Harrison Ashby. Now, when he's had his influence on those two, there's also an interesting third prong here, which is Livramento and Ashby are having a light influence on each other. So as they pick up and improve their personality, or if one learns quicker than the other, they will then start to pass it on to the other player in the group and help out the senior one in Kieran Trippier. But what we hope from this is the man who's having the most significant influence can help integrate the player, because he's going to be hanging out with them more often. And as those two players go around with Kieran Trippier, and he's still a key part of the core social group, they're naturally going to be spending more time with the core social group themselves. And this is a great way to get your players on the periphery of the squad, certainly in the social groups and on the dynamic side, to be spending more time with your key players and your key social group, ultimately with the aim of occasionally getting them to integrate into it themselves. Now, I've shown you the quick demonstration, but as I mentioned, I have tested this significantly in FM26, and it can still be useful when aiming to get more players into one social group and avoid divides in the squad, which obvious benefits leads to better togetherness, morale, quicker cohesion, and improved overall training standards at the club. While it's perhaps not as directly impactful as the previous two uses, and certainly the personality one, it can help those without influence from drifting into other social groups in the squad and perhaps upsetting the dressing room mood in the future. On a side note, almost completely separate to mentoring, it is also worth considering these dynamic factors when deciding between backup players to transfer list, as this could have an impact on your mentoring and youth development in the future. So those are the three main uses for mentoring in FM26. There's no doubt that the first one is the most popular and probably the most influential for a reason, as it has a huge impact on training, youth development, and the personality of your squad on the pitch in the long term. I always like to mention the other two forgotten uses because they are frequently neglected in the modern editions of the game. I would still prioritise personality and character use over any other cause, especially as the new layout makes it clearer than ever to see just how your mentoring group is working. A reminder though that you do need to keep an eye on them, as once junior players become more influential, particularly if you're at lower level clubs, you'll want to move on to the next young player you can help in the squad. That will get you as much benefit as possible from the senior pros while they're there. I really hope the tile can become customizable in the future, as suggested, to help make the social group information easier to see, maybe get the player traits on the same page as well. I think in essence, the groups are probably harder to set up than they were in the past in terms of finding all the information you need, but once they are set up, the way the information is displayed about the benefits and how it's progressing is probably a huge upgrade on what we've ever had before. The color coding, the layout and the golden triangle, perfect features and perfect additions. If you did enjoy this guide and found it useful though, then please do add a thumbs up on the video. If you're looking for more FM26 guides, we've got you covered on this channel for sure. Subscribe and turn that notification bell on to stay up to date with all of my daily FM26 content, including plenty of guides at the weekends. You can see our playlist to other tutorials and my long-term stories up in the eye above, as well as a link to my Twitch channel for regular live streams. Thanks for watching as always, and if you want to see how closely mentoring ties in with youth development in Football Manager, as I've discussed quite frequently during this guide, then why not click this link to watch that step-by-step guide right now.